When an artist is creating art, how aware do you think they need to be of any audience? And how aware does the designer need to be of an audience?
Well, every design problem starts with the audience, right? There's always a purpose in design. There's always a client who gives you an objective. If you're an artist, you are not concerned about the nature of the audience's preference. One has to get clear that a work of design actually has an objective. Art has no purpose except the transformation of human experience. It has nothing to do with the intention of the maker or the person who classifies themselves as an artist. Everybody wants to be an artist, right? In the presence of art, you are no longer the same after you have the experience as you were before. The transformation at its core is what defines art and separates it from all other experiences.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about the subjectivity of art and design is the person's response. So the very thing that might delight and excite one person might outrage or disgust someone else.
The point is that it's all about response. It's all about whether collectively people say through history, yes, Vermeer was an artist, as opposed to thousands of people who have disappeared because the public did not experience them that way. What I would say is that the role of art is to transform the species, and the role of design is to accomplish a task. Although, as we know, paradoxically, sometimes a work of design is also a work of art. Our work, yours and mine, basically are about persuasion and convincing people to do things. That's a very dangerous role in human culture, particularly if you're convincing them to do things that are harmful to them, as an election campaign can be, or selling soft drinks. So one of the things that is essential, I think, to talk about and to understand in the role of design and culture is that there has to be some responsibility. It's basically do no harm.
Right.
That the Hippocratic Oath is equally useful applied to designers as it is to doctors. I mean, why should a designer have more leeway than a doctor has?
The entryway to your office says art is work, which is also the title of one of your books, and something that I've really grown to associate very much with Milton Glaser. Why do you believe that art is work?
Because it's a manifestation of a physical performance. We separate art and work in some way because we understand that there's a metaphysical purpose for art. But nevertheless, you can't separate it from human experience. My most powerful desire as a child, as I entered the field, was to do the best work that I could. I had to basically draw well, I had to understand typography, I had to understand color theory, that it was basically a question of my own development. And I knew that my sense of form would be very much determined by what I could make physically. The great limitation of most designers now is they can't create form, they can only find it. Or if they create it, it's rudimentary and clumsy. One of the reasons we are in the era of collage rather than observation is because most people don't know how to draw. So that skill, which seems to be, academic skill, whatever, is actually a means to be able to visualize,
to see
things, right? But the path was all through work. And I just stayed at it, and then I had an incredible number of lucky breaks. One thing you discover is that you can't do it alone, right? You develop affinities with people who basically become your partners. And when that's positive, when you like each other, when it goes beyond professional life, when there's affection in the relationship, it provides wonderful opportunities.
Do you ever encounter designer's block or artist's block or writer's block?
That's a literary convention. If you think you encounter it, you do. If you don't think you encounter it, you don't.
Do you struggle?
I think that model of the struggling artist, if it's in your brain, that's what you become. this is not a struggle. This is joyful, wonderful activity. Even if it takes a long time, so what? It's just play. I mean, you're trying to find something, and it's a great trip.
You've been working now for over 60 years
Don't
as a
rub it in.
designer and an artist.
Significantly over 60 years.
How do ideas reach you? How do they manifest?
My belief is that the brain is the most remarkable thing in the universe. And the brain contains everything in the world, everything that ever happened in human history. My assumption is that my brain is much smarter than I am, and I can't instruct it to do anything. You have a sort of fuzzy idea of something, and then you embark, and the idea has children. The more control you think you have over it, the less likely it is to be imaginative. Here's a funny example. I had to do a portrait of George Harrison, and I remembered this painting by Dürer, which is a self-portrait of Dürer as Jesus. So I like the idea that Dürer's self-portrait as Jesus was then transformed into George Harrison's portrait for an album cover. Everything is inevitably connected.
So creative.
And what you have to do is find the connections, right? There's a portrait of De Chirico. So I took two De Chirico paintings, and I used elements from the painting and then put De Chirico himself in an armchair. And the important thing about this is that he has buttoned his sweater wrong the way old men do, because I like the idea of puzzle and complexity in these works to unfold gradually. It would make me happy if 5 years after somebody saw this, they would recognize that his sweater was unbuttoned.
I think one of my favorite quotes of Picasso is something like this. He knew how to paint like a master when he was 16, but it took him his entire life to be able to paint like a child.
Well, what he meant by that, very simply, is that what you have to do is discard your accomplishment. I mean, and in professional life, that's very hard to do. What happens in professional life is you get known for doing something exceedingly well, maybe better than anybody else. So you happen to be somebody who does pussycats better than anyone. And so you start doing pussycats, and the world comes to you to do more pussycats. It takes an enormous amount of will and self-control to say, I'm not going to do any more pussycats.
It takes a lot of bravery to move away from what you're good at.
More than bravery, it takes cutting off your legs in terms of your income.
Right.
I mean, you get the reputation for doing pussycats. I don't want to do pussycats. From now on, I want to do giraffes. Well, there's no market for giraffes, so if you want to make a living, you better stay. And that is the inevitability, not only of designer's life, but of everyone's life.
Why do you think humans have such a visceral reaction, such a negative reaction to seeing new things they haven't seen before, whether it be art or design or logos?
I think when it happens on the level that it happens with that sense of emotional response, it has to be linked to the issue of survival, right? And that goes for the sense of the other, right, or a tribal sense. You recognize members of another tribe by their difference from you. In some convoluted way, I think it's related to new experience. When abstraction was beginning to be introduced as opposed to naturalism, the reaction was overwhelming. People went crazy when they saw things that didn't represent the world the way they expected to be represented. And that goes for anything else. That's not a logo, or that's not a line, or that's not an image, or what.
And then the more we see it, the more comfortable we get with it, and then our feelings change, so that when it changes again 10 or 20 years later, exactly, we have the same reaction to the very thing we were outraged about before. It's always the same.
It's in our genetic makeup that we're talking about, that the new is always to be feared.
How can designers circumvent that?
By understanding how much people will take. I mean, the best people in the field have an intuition about what is appropriate. This is a theater in Brooklyn. I did a series of portraits of a disappearing Shakespeare. The reason I liked Shakespeare as a subject is nobody really knows what he looked like. The idea that I'm interested in is what makes things understandable. At what point do they disappear from your understanding?
One of the things that I remember you saying many, many years ago in a class that I took with you at the School of Visual Arts was why you believed the I Love New York logo had such longevity. And you talked about the fact that it's a word, I, it's a symbol, the heart, and then it is an abbreviation, which is New York, and that putting that together in one's brain gives us pleasure.
Yes, and also the fact that when you give somebody the opportunity to figure out a puzzle or to understand and to close, it persists in the brain. That's the way things remain memorable. Otherwise, I couldn't understand for a minute why that campaign, I Love New York, I did in 1977. And it's still, you go to Chinatown, you think that's all there is in Chinatown, or I Love New York.
I think it's the most successful, most repeated logo in humankind.
Well, outside of the crucifixion, yes. But the durability of this thing is just incomprehensible. I like the idea of puzzle and complexity, but if you don't do it right, if you do something they don't understand it, you can enrage people. It basically moves their emotional response. It's not just saying, I don't like that or something. They will get so excited about it. And that's one of the great, interesting issues about communication.
We are sitting in your studio, and you are located next to a school.
Yeah.
And it is playtime, and we can hear all the children outside screaming with delight.
It's very inspirational because the kids come bursting out of the school, happy, joyful, screaming, and you are reminded of how exuberant you once were and about how embracing you could be about life itself. It's easy to lose that, but the kids are a daily reminder that joy is around us.